Part 6, Servo Control. What we're going to do is we'll look at how to control a little servo. So that's our little servo that's here. With our Arduino Nano. So first things first, take it out of the bag. And we're going to add one of our servo horns, and I'm just going to grab the single arm bar and the smaller screw. So there's one small one and two longer ones. I'm going to just grab the small screw and my screwdriver and my servo. So I'm going to grab the servo horn. I'm going to pop it onto the top of my servo, pop the screw into there, and I'm going to just screw that down gently. It's only finger tight, and that's enough. Now, you should try not to do what I'm doing now, which is to rotate these servos by hand. You should always use the Arduino to do that. They will wear out and they will break if you do it manually by hand a lot. It is good to see that it does work, but other than that, you should only be doing that very rarely. Okay, so we'll need 3 wires. We'll need a orange, a red, and a brown. So I'm just going to hook them up. Orange, brown, and my red. Now these servos, the brown is connected to ground. The red is to 5 volts. And the orange is going to go to pin 9, which is our signal to get our servo to rotate. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is if we hop onto the Arduino website and we go into our reference documents for servo, what we'll see is under the reference document for servo, we're told a little bit about the servo library. We're also given some functions as to that we can execute as part of the servo library, and some examples. So we've got a control of the position of the servo with respect to a potentiometer, and also a sweeping backwards and forwards of the servo. What we'll do is we'll just have a look at the attach, and there'll be a bit of simple code in here that explains to us how to set up our servos straight away. So here you'll see that we have to include the servo library, which is servo.h. We are then creating an instance of the servo library, which is going to be called myservo. And then as we work through it, we're going to attach it to a certain pin 9, and then we can execute our main loop. So this is the initial setup of how to attach the servo. So we're just going to mimic that in our Arduino code. Okay, so we've got our setup correct. Now we want to write to the servo and actually get it to do a movement. So the way to do that is to get into the write function and have a look in here. So all we need to do is say myservo.right and then put the angle in. Okay, so the angle is between 0 and 180 degrees. Alright, so you'll see here that we have an initial setup, so all we need to do is write myservo.right 90 and that'll go to the 90 position. Okay, let's verify our code. And run it. Okay, and you'll notice that the servo just moved very, very quickly and it's sitting at 90. Let's add a little bit of extra code in here. Let's put a delay in of half a second. And we'll change this to being 0 degrees, or maybe we'll say 10 degrees, and then we'll get it to go to 180, a little bit less, 170. Excellent. So that proves that our servo is working. So now what we need to do is incorporate our switches now. So I'll just disconnect this so that it's quieter. So all I've done is I just pulled out the control pin. Okay, so that's the PWM control to the servo. It's the orange lead. I just pulled that out. So what I'll do now is I'll write to my servos to go to a particular position, and it does take time for that servo to go to a position. So I'm going to put a little bit of a delay in here so that it takes some time for it to execute that command, and that way then it gives us a smoother operation of our servo. So I'll leave that as the half a second. It seems to be okay. In half a second we're almost getting to the full end of that travel. So the question says that if no buttons are pressed, the servo should be at angle 30 degrees. So this is 30 degrees. So we can write in our if statement. So if no button is pressed, let's have a look at SW0. So we have digital read SW0, and if this is high, that means that, got a commenter code, that means that the push button is not pushed. Otherwise, that means that the button is pushed. And we want to go to 110 degrees. So now let's execute that and see if we get the response that we're supposed to get. Don't forget we've got to plug our servo back in. Excellent. So we're at 30 degrees, push the button, we go to 110. And it looks visibly like as if it's almost 90 degrees. It's 80 degrees worth of travel, so I think we're correct. Excellent. Now, the next part of the question actually says there if one of the buttons is pushed. So what we need to do is check to make sure that both buttons, what the state of both buttons are. So as long as both of them are high, then we're okay. So I'm going to add some extra brackets in here. So this is one condition. So this condition and the same for switch 2 need to both be true. So that's, we're anding those cases. I've got one extra bracket there. I can get rid of one of those. So this will be switch 1. So if both are not pushed, okay, let's upload our code. So it should stay in our 30 position, which is good. Pushed one of the buttons, it went. Push the other button, it goes. Now I can push both at the same time, and it goes as well to our 110 value. And then our return. Excellent.